We're so happy to have you, to welcome you to Black Star, Still Rising, sponsored by the Black Star Project and named for Philip Jackson, who said, learn or die. Now you get your pencil and paper out. There's going to be a lot of information that you're going to take down. We've got a fabulous guest here today. I'm going to introduce her in a few minutes. But I want to first acknowledge to make sure that I get a chance to acknowledge the people that make this program happen. First of all, there's Imani Payne. She's in our control studio. She's our studio producer. Imani, thank you very much for doing all that you do. And her sidekick, not here today, but Rocio Santos, the other studio producer, who does a great job in getting this done. I cannot forget my associate producers for the guest involvement, and that's Doc Michael Washington, the associate producer for guest engagement. That is going to be Mr. Ennis Taylor. So you've got some of the important people that are in part of making Black Star Project and the Black Star Rising possible, including Lisa Dawn Taylor, the editor, publisher of the South Shore Current magazines. I am excited, and you can probably tell my excitement. I got my goddaughter here today. A little bit of nepotism, but not too much because she's a talented woman. I have with me today Kandice Head. My goddaughter for almost 30 years, or you just a little bit over 30 years. Women don't normally tell their age, but it's all right with you, right?
Yes.
Kandice, welcome here today to
you.
Black Star Still Rising. You should know a little bit about her, just enough to tease you. She's an essayist, she's a poet, she's a published author, and you're going to see and hear some of her works. Kandice, tell me how you got started in being a poet.
I got started at a very, very young age. I always tell people, my mother was an English teacher and my father was, a professor and a history teacher.
And all those things.
So when you combine, an English teacher and a history buff, you get a poet.
Yes.
And so
I didn't know that was it, but yeah.
Yeah, or a speaker.
Oh, yes.
My brother is. And so I found poetry, or poetry found me when I was in about fifth grade.
You got to stop 1 second. You got to tell the story behind it because you shocked me when you told me the real story.
Yes.
You could share that with folks.
Absolutely.
Tell us what happened. How it changed your life.
Yeah, so I was a pretty disengaged student, to keep it mildly. I was not for the classroom. I was in and out of the principal's office. Constant reports and write-ups to my house, and the teachers just didn't know what to do with me. And my mom, shout out to mothers who academically fight for their kids, would constantly say, she is not a bad child, she's just a bored child. She needs to be stimulated, she needs to be engaged,
Right.
And so for a while that didn't happen, and I was in and out of detention, and I got to fifth grade and we were introduced to the poetry unit, and I found my first Maya Angelou piece and never looked back. And I just remember being so young. I was about 11 years old. And I just remember reading those words, and I saw myself on the page in a way that I never had before. And
Which words?
The poem, Phenomenal Woman.
That's a powerful statement. Phenomenal woman. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And there was just something about those words that I couldn't put down. So I began to memorize Phenomenal Woman, and then ended up memorizing a third of her work. And it led me to, I feel like once you read enough poetry, you start to write your own because it just starts to pour out of you. And that's
just
absolutely
hold it in.
Right. So that's absolutely what happened. It started off as raps and little quick stanzas that I would write in the back of class, and then it formed into this.
Before you knew it, you were engaged, and honor roll and everything probably followed very, very soon after.
Yes.
Okay.
It quickly changed my academic trajectory. I ended up becoming more focused and engaged in school.
Tell us about what you did in terms of being a leader of a school organization, etc., that poetry,
Yes.
bringing out poetry did for you.
Yeah, so absolutely. Because I loved it so much, I wanted to create space for other writers, for other poets, for other people who were interested in creative writing. And so when I went to high school, I formed my high school's first ever literary club. And we brought together a bunch of poets, and we sat and we shared poems, and we shared writing prompts, and we competed, and we put on shows for Black History Month. And it was just a beautiful moment, because as I've grown in my writing, I think writing is one of those things where we feel like it's this siloed approach, where we just, we feel like it's something we do in a dark room alone, but the power in your work is actually in writing in community. And so just starting to build my community from a very young age, and the power of what it meant to bring people together who were also obsessed with the written word, did a lot for my poetry and for my self-actualization.
I think one other important fact we cannot let go of, for these parents out here watching, this is an intergenerational program, Black Star Project and the Black Star Still Rising. Parents, know this, your involvement, your engagement is significant. As she was saying, how much her mother, and we got to give a shout out to Alpha Kappa Alpha, Mother's Day, AKA, that's Big Kandice, and she was so much involved in getting her daughter and making sure that her daughter and son and your twin brother were engaged in the school, and that the school did what it was supposed to do. So that was a part of your story too, and a life-changing moment that we talked about. That intervention that she had. Tell us and share with us how poetry, because folks don't think about poetry as being a life-changing force in your life. Just share with our audience there that how it became a life-changing force. Tell us some of the things.
So it really helped with my confidence. As I started to write more poetry, I was called on to perform more. And so I had to be on stages, and that's nothing new for my family. My mother was a professional jazz vocalist, and so I grew up watching her on stage. And so being able to express myself differently, because I cannot hold a note. But being able,
because your mother was a beautiful singer, no question about that.
Singer. Yes. So just being able to have that self-expression and just an area that was just all my own. I encourage so many people to find whatever their creative outlet is, because sometimes you grow up in families and your identity gets attached to who you may be related to or what your family is involved in. But being on stage was my one moment where I wasn't somebody's daughter. I wasn't just somebody's twin sister. I was just Kandice Head who had something to say.
Tell us your middle name too. Can you tell us your middle? I know you don't use it professionally.
No. Ilan Lene.
Okay. Because I love it myself. I can pronounce it most days. But
Yeah, so it was an amazing moment, and for me, it's carried me throughout my entire life. I've been through some unimaginably difficult moments. I've been through more grief than a little bit over the past 4 years, having lost both of my parents, and I always came back to the pen. It always regrounded me, whether I was reading someone else's words, whether it was Alice Walker or Cleo Wade or Jasmine Mans, the incredible poets that have come before me. I always found strength in the written word, in poetry, in this art form. So it's done a lot of, it's saved my life in so many different ways. And I am so privileged to be a part of this tradition, one that I acknowledge is one rooted in Black radical tradition. I'm a proud...
Say that again, Black radical tradition.
Yes.
Who are some of the folks that were your influence in Black radical tradition? I know one, because you shared it with me.
Yes.
And I think you got a quote in there.
Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni are just just a couple that I look up to among many. But yeah, I've been following and reading their words since I was 7, 8 years old. And it's the poetry that awakened me, because
Poetry of the movement of activists. You were reading that at 8 years old.
Yes.
Listen to this now.
Yes.
Go ahead. It's not too young. Listen to this, big audience.
I mean, Yeah, at 8, 9, 10 years old, I was reading about the Black Arts Movement. I was reading Dudley Randall and reading about the Civil Rights Movement. I performed the Ballad of Birmingham for a contest called Poetry Out Loud, which is a very popular recitation contest. And just, learning the words, you really also learn the story around them, and it activates you. It makes you want to do better for your community, want more for your community, continue to drive it forward. Because poetry shares stories. It tells us where we have been, but it also tells us where we're going.
You told me a very interesting thing about poetry, and you phrased it as the nuances of this art form. And you talked about reading 10 times. And that struck me. Please share with the audience the nuances of this special art form.
Yes. Yeah, so we were talking about why poetry may feel inaccessible for some folks. And I was sharing that, in a lot of writers, there's different writing styles. Everybody's writing style is as unique as a fingerprint. But because poetry often has a lot more nuances, there are poets like Amanda Gorman who so masterfully pens words, where...
Remind the folks where that Amanda, her claim to fame. Her claim to fame. Tell us about Amanda again.
Yes, Amanda Gorman was the inaugural poet for Joe Biden's inauguration. But she, is a youth poet laureate and has, a full resume before that moment. But she is the author of the poem, The Hills We Climb. But she also authored a collection that is called Call Us What We Carry.
That's the newest one?
Yes, okay. And it's an incredible collection. But yeah, so we have poets like her who are just masterful, where one word may be used to communicate 3 different meanings. And so we were just talking about the importance of nuance when you're approaching poetry,
yes.
And that sometimes it may take you 9 or 10 times to read a poem to understand it, and even then you might not fully understand it in its entirety because it came from that poet's mind. There are some things in my pieces that are inside jokes to just only myself, and others might not ever pick up on it, and so poetry is like that. It's a different language, and that's what I enjoy about it.
We're going to take a kind of a station break for a couple of reasons. One, we want to acknowledge now the executive director of Black Star Project, and that is Gloria Smith, who has been the person, the driving force that Philip Jackson left it to her to continue the work out of the Black Star Project. So a shout out to Gloria and to the staff there. But I also want to let you know that in order to find out about some of the programs that we may mention a little bit later on, I've got a phone number for you to write down. You folks at the Atlas Senior Citizen on 79th in Krieger, you folks at Crocs, write this information down. The number for the Black Star Project is 773-285-9600. I'm going to repeat that. 773-285-9600. Now, about 3 people that you can talk to there, and they'll be glad to help you. And if you leave a message, your call will be returned. You're going to ask for either Michael Roundtree, Director for Operations. You're going to talk to Cortez Watson. We had him on the program a month or so ago. And also Justin Douglas, who is going to be a marvelous addition to the Black Star Project. But I think we want to take a moment. You have an excerpt, I think, that you were going to share with us from Sonia. Or was that the one you want? And you want to tell us what you're going to do with this book that you brought here today. Who's that going to go to?
Oh, sure. Okay, well, I'll start and read the interruption.
Please.
Okay.
This is from the book. Show the folks stuff.
This is from my collection called Black Girl Symphony in Poetry in Prose. It's available on CandiceWrites.com, KandiceWrites. And
if you get that, take my phone number down, 312-662-3106, and I'll make sure that you get in contact with Kandice about the book. But go ahead, Kandice, please.
Sure. So this is the interruption. It begins with a quote by Sonia Sanchez, which says, "Black is the beginning, and if we are the beginning, we will be forever."
Powerful. You can say a few more, I think, that you got in the yes.
Yeah. Blackness is an interruption you cannot ignore. My blackness invades my thoughts, pierces my perspective, and molds my expectation of self. It expands my understanding, is the reason I'm still standing, and it beautifully brands me like you tried to. It never conforms to your bland norms. It shines through the cracks and keyholes of your closed doors and gave birth to everything you claim is yours. It pours out of your red line ghettos, spreads far beyond the history pages you limit it to, and it built your perfectly crafted landscapes. See, blackness doesn't care what you thought this was. It's here to tell you what it is. Because we too are America, waiting in the kitchen when company comes, laughing, eating well, and growing stronger. You can't duplicate it, imitate it, or replicate it, but you try to. And what you try to obliterate always comes back with a momentum you try to recreate, because blackness is that interruption you cannot ignore. So stop trying, because darkness is just as powerful as the light, is just as clear, speaks just as loudly, and just like light, blackness shines. But then again, we all appreciate things in time.
Now, you just addressed perfectly the power of poets. And that power is in many of the intergenerational group, the younger group, of what you have. And to the parents and grandparents of the younger intergenerational group, expose them, begin to expose them to the poets like Kandice. But also, keep in mind, and I want to make this announcement too, Juneteenth this year will be the third time the Black Star Project is sponsoring a Juneteenth program on June 15th, at the Black Star location at 3509 South MLK Drive, aka the Philip Jackson Parkway. So keep that and put that on your calendar. June 15th, Juneteenth. There'll be fun games. In fact, there'll be basketball courts for some of the young men and young women who play basketball. There'll be a number of things to do, and you'll be excited to know that Kandice will also be there reading poetry during the speakers part of the program. So put that on your calendar for the June 15th. And as I told you also, for further information, 773-285-9600, Black Star Headquarters. Please call those folks, Cortez Watson, Michael Roundtree, and Justin Douglas, and they will give you information that you need for being involved in some of the programs. You talked about it one time, you told me about a Black Girls Symposium. Is that something that you were involved in? Did I get that confused?
Oh, no, that's just the name of the book.
Oh,
A Black Girl Symphony.
I knew that. Okay, I knew that part. We got Sonia. Okay. You mentioned to me in preparing me for the show and preparing for the show how the creative outlet has been put on the back burners in education, and that's one of the things that often cut when budgets are cut by school districts. Talk about that. Address that, please.
Yeah, the arts, are so incredible. Anybody who came from the arts and around them knows the power of them, knows the community that is formed. Not only did I find myself through poetry, but I also played music growing up. I was in marching band. I was in symphonic band.
Or saxophone?
The saxophone.
Okay. Yeah.
So I played the violin, I played the piano, and having that outlet not only, helped give me an outlet to express myself and to work through all of the normal emotions of being a young Black person growing up in America, it also sharpened me academically, because when you're learning music or when you're learning the nuances of poetry, it sharpens how you learn, and so I can't emphasize that enough, but also just creating space for your children and knowing that, whatever time that you give to them is going to affirm them in whatever craft they choose. I know we talked about how my mother...
Yeah, tell us about that's an interesting story. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so anytime I would write a new poem or a rap or what have you, my mom was always the first person I read all of my drafts to. Why? Because she was so excited, and it never was a space of critique or you need to do this better. It was just accepting me for where I was as as a poet and writer, and she would have everything turned off. The second I said,
she stopped the show.
Yes,
You were the show.
She would stop everything. If she was on the phone, she would get off the phone. If my brother was moving in the background, she'd tell him to be
Sit
still.
your butt down.
She would stop absolutely everything and give me that space and that undivided attention. And that really helped me with my self-identity, and it communicated to me that this work is important. Even if it's a tiny little poem that's 60 words that I wrote in the back of my 5th grade class, this space and this talent and this time is important.
Parents, grandparents, don't you see how easy that is to incorporate into making your children, your grandchildren involved, engaged, and sharpening their wits and everything about them with just giving them the attention that you got, and how that started to shape your life? That might bring me into, you had another exciting poem. Origami? Which one was that?
Yeah, sure. Origami?
Yes.
So I will share Origami. I forgot to bookmark.
And we're going to save some time to talk about your another book. This woman has another book coming out in October. We'll tell you more as the year gets closer to the time. But she continues to write. This is one of my favorites, hearing her speak. Now listen to it. Listen for the nuances that she talks about. We're not going to read it 10 times, but if you buy the book, this is not a commercial. If you buy the book, you can read it 10 times. Please tell us a little bit about that poem.
Yeah. Origami. Black girls been told to fold themselves like origami, to contort their bodies into beautiful shapes. Tuck in your trauma. Fold away your pain with your shame face up. Fold vertically, left to right. Align your edges on the right lines and make sure you hide all the flaps society ain't looking for. Unfold again, then fold once more. They tell us to hold it down, then fold it up. They tell us to tuck, but conveniently withhold. That to them will never be folded enough. Will never be beautiful enough. Will never be perfect enough or even enough. But when a black girl unfolds herself, you witness the immense majesty of her full page. Here lies her story, living, pulsating, vibrantly bleeding, suffocating, needing to exhale. Let her breathe. Reach beneath her contorted exterior and past her distorted belief that what makes her unique makes her inferior. And let her breathe. See, I believe every black girl has a diamond on the inside, and since the world can't control it, they want her to fold herself over it. But she ain't pretty paper. And over again, her treasure has been paid for, so stop trying to shape her for a world that can't afford to obtain her. Black girls been told to fold ourselves like origami, to contort our bodies into beautiful shapes, to tuck in our trauma, to fold away our pain with our shame face up. But if no one tells you this, you are beautiful enough. You are perfect enough. You are more than enough. Never fold for a world that can never measure up to you. And breathe.
Knock me out, woman. You knock me out. And I know you knock out our audience. I'm curious about a couple of things. We're going to talk about your new book. And that's an interesting concept. The book is about grief.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit, or share a little bit about it so that we can prepare for it sometime in October of this year, please?
Yes, in the fall I have a new collection coming out. It's solely poetry. It's called Covered Poems of Root and Rise, and it talks about grief, as you mentioned before. In 2020, we lost so many people so quickly. A lot of people started coining it, an epidemic of grief. And I feel as a society and this culture, we never really held space for that. We didn't hold space enough for the funerals that we couldn't have, the people that had to leave the earth alone, and we couldn't be there holding their hand because of the restrictions of a global pandemic. So the collection honors grief. It honors those who are going through the grief experience, and it also kind of names some of the gifts of grief. The sharpened sense of presence you have, and the rewiring of what actually matters. And so I hope if it could just touch and reach one person who's going through loss, it would have done its job. But that collection will be available in October.
And that's the job what poetry does. It brings out a series of emotions that we experience, and we should not be ashamed of grieving and finding ways to let that out. And you let it out. And I know some of the things that caused your grief during that period and how you have stood the test of that grief and you letting yourself go. Tell us how it affected some of your peers, some of your classmates at the University of Missouri. I didn't tell you she's graduated University of Missouri in how many years ago has it been now?
Almost 10.
That long? That passed that fast? It passed really fast. But she had a great experience in that period of time there. And we'll end it about that. You're telling about the experience at the University of Missouri and the friends that you made from across the country.
Oh, we don't have enough time for that.
Okay.
But yeah, I am a proud graduate of the University of Missouri. Had incredible community there. Shout out to the National Association of Black Journalists. That's where I met my very best friends in life. And I, began my career there as a journalist by trade. And
What about some of getting ready for that? You took some courses at Iowa State over the summers?
yes, I went to a
went to-
journalism camp in Iowa.
So she did all the things preparing for being the writer that she is. But I'm so happy to have Kandice here. And let's see, can we talk about anybody else? We talked about Amanda. We talked about Jasmine Knight. We talked about one of my favorites is Rupi, and a black male poet, R.H. Sin. So if you want further information about poems, poetry between Kandice and myself, 312-662-3106, and at the Black Star Project office, 773-285-9600. Get ready for Juneteenth, the 15th of June, at the Black Star headquarters at 35th and King Drive at Philip Jackson Parkway. So glad to have you here today. Kandice, you're so good. I got to have you back at some point. And thank you, Amani, putting us on and making us look good today and giving us all the time to expound about some of our beautiful poems that we've had today.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear.